Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. It's the post-game podcast from the Timberwolves' second consecutive win over a plus 500 team. That's right. We'll talk about the coaching adjustments that led to a big fourth quarter for the Timberwolves next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend, a great holiday weekend here in the U.S., and a big Timberwolves weekend. Minnesota won 2 straight games, their first 2 wins against teams above 500, and they're on a back-to-back, Saturday and Sunday. Nice wins over the Celtics and the Spurs. Yes, caveats apply, guys who played, didn't play, whatever. But it matters. You got to beat who you play, and they won the games, and they won them fairly impressively. We'll talk today about the Spurs game. This is the post-game pod from Sunday's win. So we'll dig in on that a bit. I have a couple of big things. Usually I do 3 big things off the top. I'm going to give you 2. The second one has a lot of sub-bullets to it because it's about coaching adjustments, and there were a lot of things that the coaching staff did a little bit differently in this game from a rotation standpoint, a little bit from a schematic standpoint. We'll dig in on some of those things here today as well. And, of course, we'll close, as we always do, with individual studs and duds from Wolves Spurs. A big thank you first off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right, quick plug if you missed it. I did the live postcast last night with Jack Borman, filled in for Luke, who does a fantastic job virtually all of our games. We go live following the game right here on, live on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, on the Locked On Wolves channel there, as well as if you're listening to the audio version of the show. The episode before this is the postcast I did with Jack last night. Typically, it's hosted by Luke Inman. Jack is usually the guest. I'll actually probably be filling in as the guest at some point here in the next week or so. So make sure to check that out live after each and every game. And if you miss it, you can always find it on YouTube or the audio version here on the audio feed after the fact. I want to dig in today on my 2 big things. The first thing, let's talk about Anthony Edwards, and we'll talk briefly about him later, I guess, in studs and duds as well. Obviously, he is going to be a stud in this game. He had a weird game. If you just look at his box score and didn't watch the game, you'd be like, man, 7 turnovers to 6 assists. What was he doing? This is true. But then also look at how efficient he was scoring the basketball. 32 points on 18 shots. He made 13 field goals in this game. He only missed 5 shots. He also only got to the free throw line twice. Typically, if you're going to have a high turnover game like that, it's a little incongruent to see a 7 turnover game, but also only missing 5 shots from the field and only getting to the line twice. And he only shot 6 threes too. So somehow he launched 12 twos in this game and only got to the free throw line 1 time. And yes, he did get called for a technical. I think it was late first quarter. It was early in this game. I thought the officiating was spotty. At the same time, I didn't mind the fact that there were only a total combined, 32 free throws between the 2 teams. I mean, how many games have we seen recently where each team's shooting 30-plus free throws? So I didn't mind that the officials let them play. It was a little frustrating that it was at the expense of Anthony Edwards. The fact that Ant got to the rim as many times as he did and only had 2 free throw attempts was kind of crazy. But that's not the point. The point is you can get away with, and I said this on the postcast, you can get away with 7 turnovers if you only miss 5 shots and you score 32 points. Like, you're making up for those miscues. And also, by the way, the rest of the team only combined for 5 turnovers. The Timberwolves only had 12 turnovers in this game, and Ant had 7 of them. And 5 of them, by the way, were in the first quarter. I think he had 5 in the first quarter, 1 in the second, and I think 1 in the third. A really impressive, resilient performance. I think that's the word I would use to describe Anthony Edwards' performance in this game, because those 5 turnovers in the first quarter, it was brutal. And it took him a minute to get going, and then all of a sudden he had a 3, and then I was like, all right, he's in this thing now after he opened with, I don't even think he scored before he had multiple turnovers, if I remember correctly. So I would say his resiliency, and then also this dovetails a little bit into kind of the end of the coaching adjustment point I'll make. Minnesota ran some actual sets at the end of the game, which I know it's shocking because if you've watched really any games over the week prior to this. They're over the course of their 3-game losing streak. Their collapses at Phoenix and Sacramento, and then their home loss, whatever day that was, last Wednesday, or I guess it was a road loss to OKC last Wednesday. They actually ran some sets at the end of the game that Ant benefit off of. And they weren't necessarily actions that were designed to get Ant a shot. They were actions that Ant could initiate and then be in a spot that was advantageous to get a catch and shoot off of the other motion, where essentially Ant's getting lost in the wash in a good way. The defense is so concerned about the other stuff that's going on that they're not paying attention to Ant standing there open, waiting for a catch and shoot three or a catch and jet to the rim. And I would also, that kind of the other point I wanted to make here is the decisiveness that Ant was making. Yes, he had 7 turnovers. A couple of them, I think 2 of them in the first quarter were on that, where he pump fakes and then he steps through, because he was a little indecisive. But as soon as he just was ripping and going, whether it was a shot, a swinging the ball on the perimeter, a driving kick, get all the way to the cup, whatever it was, as soon as he was being decisive, he was finding success. And I mean, that's like an across the board thing for basketball players, right? You can't be indecisive, but that's something where with Ant, when he's actually decisive, he's almost unstoppable. It's when he's not sure what to do and he's jab stepping and, okay, I guess I'll go the ISO route. Like, some of that stuff is what really throws him off. And then he is behind the 8 ball and he doesn't have success as much offensively. He's missing shots. He's shooting more mid-range jumpers. He's, doing the stuff he was doing in the first quarter where he's stuck in between a pass and a shot. And he just kind of I think he had 2 turnovers. The ball just kind of slipped out of his hands, like dribbled to the floor, because he was indecisive. And as soon as he was more decisive, and Minnesota ran a few sets in the fourth quarter that allowed him to be decisive within the flow of the offense, where he's not the sole focal point of the offense, he found a lot of success offensively. And that was a key thing as the game kind of wore on. Okay, let's get to my second big thing, which this was going to take a bit more time because I have some subpoints here. Coaching adjustments. And I think we can start here. Minnesota opened the fourth quarter with a small lineup. Typically, they start the fourth quarter with Ant on the bench and Rudy's on the floor. That's not what happened here. Minnesota had a small lineup out there with Mike Conley, Dante DiVincenzo in the backcourt, Nas and Julius Randle, and Jaden in the front court. So Nas effectively playing the center position although Randle offensively at least functions more as a center in that small ball lineup. And it worked so well, in fact, that Rudy did not play the entire fourth quarter, and Minnesota was a plus 17. They outscored San Antonio 36-19 in the fourth quarter. And it's not an indictment on Rudy. And Chris Finch, I won't say danced around it. He gave a very Chris Finch answer when asked about it after the game. He's like, Rudy's fine. I'm sure he's happy we won. Usually he's on the floor, because he's so impactful defensively. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically was like, yeah, I mean, every game is different, essentially, is what he said. And he's right. Minnesota's needed some offense. I say that this is a game they scored a ton of points, but they needed a little bit of a boost to get some more efficient offense. And they also needed to throw a wrench in what the Spurs were doing on their end of the floor offensively. So they went to the small lineup. They started the quarter down 4. They started the fourth down 4, and then they got up 10 by the time the Spurs called a timeout and made a lineup adjustment. This is that small lineup that I just listed. And in fact, over at Synergy, you can look at points per possession and different stats by lineup. That 4-man lineup with Conley and DiVincenzo in the backcourt, McDaniels, Nas, Reid, and Julius Randle played 11 possessions together offensively and scored 21 points. That's a 1.91 points per possession. 21 points in 11 possessions, essentially 2 points per possession, which is absurd. And I know 11 possessions is a relatively small sample, but that's like roughly half of what you'd expect your starting lineup to play over the course of the game anyway. So it's not nothing. And it's definitely not nothing when you look at the run the Wolves went on. Remember, they started the fourth down 4. They started the fourth down what? It was 93-89. By the time the Spurs called a timeout and the Wolves put Ant back in the game, it was 110-100. So Minnesota went on a 21-7 run with that lineup on the floor. That lineup worked extremely well. It's not going to work well all the time, and the Spurs are a really, really well-coached team and a good team, even without Wembanyama and Stephon Castle. But going small ball was a somewhat unexpected adjustment there that worked extremely well. And I want to talk a little bit about two of the other coaching adjustments, one has to do with the zone the Wolves played, actually with Gobert and without Gobert in this game, but without him in the fourth quarter is when that made a big difference. So we'll talk about one other coaching piece before we get into individual studs and duds. That's all upcoming here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at PrizePicks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports. Bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes, it's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, it's fast, and it's available in 45 states. Plus, they have an extra layer of excitement to the holiday sports schedule. It just, like, you can create your lineup in less than a minute. The app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. You can choose from a huge range of unique stats. You can pick more or less than fantasy score, field goals attempted, free throws made, turnovers, whatever fits your strategy. The early payoff feature is also a great bonus. When your lineup starts strong, you can get the option to cash out early. Plus, the new stacks feature lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup. For instance, you could take like more on Patrick Mahomes' quarterback passing yards because the Chiefs need to start winning some games. You might take more on touchdowns for probably not a Vikings player in the wake of what happened in Seattle on Sunday. Whatever the case might be, download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKDOWNNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Obviously could not do that without our loyal listeners. And those of you that make this show your first listen every day, a big thank you to you especially. All right. So we talked about Ant's performance. We talked about coaching adjustments, including the small lineup. And I don't want to say benching Rudy Gobert. I don't think benching is, technically that's what it was, but I don't think that's the right word to use here. It's not like Gobert played poorly. I thought he actually had a pretty good first half. He wasn't the problem defensively when San Antonio scored 37 in the first quarter. I think it was more perimeter contain, issues at the point of attack, which honestly, when Minnesota was down going into the fourth quarter, I thought I was going to come on here and talk about point of attack defense, because San Antonio, especially in the first quarter, was when Rudy was off the floor, like they were getting switches, and as good as Nas was defensively on Saturday, like De'Aaron Fox was hunting him in switches and beating him off the dribble. Again, that didn't happen Saturday. It did happen early in the game Sunday when they didn't get the switch. Conley, was struggling to stay in front of De'Aaron Fox. But credit Minnesota, they shored that up a little bit. Obviously, that was the best offensive quarter that the Spurs had. And by the time we got to the fourth quarter, well, actually, the Wolves they did play some zone in the second quarter with Rudy on the floor, and it worked. I think they ran 3 or 4 possessions of zone in the second quarter, and the Spurs didn't score. They brought it back in the fourth quarter with Gobert off the floor, which honestly, I think they should do more of when Gobert's not on the floor, switching into more of a zone. And that's maybe something we'll talk about more on tomorrow's show. We can look at, like, the Wolves haven't played a ton of zone this year. And you're not going to play it a lot of the time. And I don't think it makes a ton of sense to play it when Gobert's on the floor, usually, depending on the opponent. It did work in this game with Gobert on the floor, but without him on the floor, it was perfect in the fourth quarter for Minnesota, just kind of trying to force the Spurs into, like, what happens when you're an offense and the defense is in a zone. You either got to be really good at your isolation one-on-one offense and breaking teams down and then driving and kicking or getting all the way to the rim if the defense isn't on point on the back end. Or you got to move the ball, and you can screen against the zone. Like, I know that's something that, like, in middle school you're taught maybe not to do, but in the NBA, you got to screen against the zone. You have to be able to, knife your way through off the dribble and move the ball around the perimeter. You just can't be stagnant. The Spurs got stagnant, and then they settled for a bunch of these weird, like, kind of sort of mid-range jumpers that the Wolves actually, like, credit the Wolves zone. It wasn't just like, hey, we ran zone and it worked. It was actually a pretty active zone. Like, if you watch it back, like Conley, Julius, Randle in the fourth quarter had really good rotations within the zone where they were covering for each other. They were stepping up. Randle's the low man, stepping up to the middle of the paint and forcing a tough shot by, I don't remember if it was Fox or maybe it was Keldon Johnson, but it was just active and it was good. And they used the zone for profit. And in this game, according to Synergy, the Wolves ran the zone 7 times and the Spurs didn't score a single point against the zone. So using the zone judiciously, I think, is something we could see moving forward, especially in the non-Rudy lineups, non-Rudy minutes. It makes a ton of sense for the Wolves to do that against teams that, I mean, again, it depends on how that other team's playing. Like, I don't know necessarily that it works super well against a team with Wemby on the floor, but when really all the Spurs are doing is the only way they're going to get their offense is move the basketball, try and get corner threes, which they shoot a lot of, and it's De'Aaron Fox and Devin Vassell probing. And neither one of those guys shot the ball extremely well. Fox had a good game. Most of that was early, but Vassell was 1 of 9 outside the arc. Like, he was going to try and drive against the zone. Same with Keldon Johnson, to try and at least force them into more difficult shots. Like, Dylan Harper played really well in this game as well, 17 points. The Spurs shot 52%, but they were 24% outside the arc. And the zone threw a wrench in everything, and it challenged them to make shots from the outside, which they were unable and also a little bit unwilling to do. They didn't shoot that many threes late in this game. So overall, that was a really smart adjustment by Chris Finch and the coaching staff. And then the other thing that I would say, I'd put this under the umbrella of coaching adjustments, is the thing I alluded to very early in the show here today, is the offensive sets Minnesota ran toward the end. And to be clear, like, Minnesota was up 10 with 6 minutes left in the game, and it never got below 10 at that point, I don't think. I guess it did get to 9 briefly with 4 minutes to play, and it felt like it could get dicey. And then Minnesota actually ran some real offense that generated threes for Jaden McDaniels. I think maybe the Ant 3 I'm thinking of might have been right before that mini run. But it's really kind of, they ran some stuff with false action to kind of distract the defense and ultimately get Anthony Edwards some catch and shoot opportunities. Jaden hit a deep 3 off of some nice ball movement from Minnesota. And it's not like, I'm not saying that isolation can't work for, because obviously Anthony Edwards is a good isolation player. Julius Randle, up until, I haven't looked in the last week, but he had been literally the best, most efficient isolation player in the entire NBA. That stuff can work, but it's when it's every time down the floor and it's that predictable, and well-coached teams like, say, OKC last Wednesday, and this Spurs team, in theory, then could just load up on that isolation and, force the ball out of Ant's hands, or force him to play against 2, whatever the case might be. Starting the possession with an actual offensive set is the right way to go, even if it's off ball motion, whatever it is, to try and at least distract the defense. They can't entirely load up on Anthony Edwards. And the Wolves did that late in this game. And granted, again, it was never below 9 in the final 6 minutes of the game. And so it wasn't like, white knuckle time like we saw several times over the 3-game losing streak. But it was close. And it was right at that edge of where things have teetered recently. Even on Saturday against the Celtics, where things teetered. And I thought Minnesota did a really good job of not allowing the teeter to totter, if you will, to completely kind of roll into that mode where, oh no, what do we do? They did a good job of keeping that from happening. And I think all the adjustments I've mentioned, we have to credit those adjustments. We have to credit the way that obviously the players executed. And then rotation wise in the fourth quarter, like, again, I mean, no Rudy, I think is significant to point out. I thought that late in the game, some of the offensive things the Wolves did was really smart. And then obviously the way Ant finished, I mentioned earlier, he had 5 turnovers in the first quarter. I think he only had 1 in the second half total. That was very impressive for Anthony Edwards. And if you're only going to miss 5 shots, that you could get away with that. All right. I want to close today by looking at individual studs and duds. We'll peek ahead at the week. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, and every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver might get hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines will just instantly, plus player props update as guys heat up. You can beat next touchdown scores, or you could bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. Tonight's Monday Night Football game, Giants at Patriots. New England's favored 7.5 points. Obviously, I think, like, straight up, New England wins this game, but I don't mind the Giants plus 7.5. I think they're better than people give them credit for. Jackson Dart is supposed to play, make his return I kind of like Giants plus 7.5 for tonight's game. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, let's close this thing out by talking individual studs and duds. Anthony Edwards, obviously a stud. We talked a lot about him. I'll give his line real quick. 32 points on 18 shots, efficient every day of the week with only 2 free throw attempts. 2 of 2 at the line, 4 of 6 on threes for Ant. Nice to see him hit from downtown a little bit more the last couple games after a big swoon there. 7 turnovers, as we talked about, 6 assists, just 3 rebounds for Ant. But overall, like, I don't know. I think resilient is the best way to explain the performance from Anthony Edwards. Julius Randle, really good. Have barely talked about Julius. I thought especially actually early and late in this game, first and fourth quarters, Julius was very good. 22 points on 15 shots. I probably should have talked more about Randle earlier. 9 of 15 shooting, 2 of 5 outside the arc. Hit a big three-pointer from the corner. As I mentioned a minute ago, things were teetering just a little. Was good down the stretch. 12 assists, only 1 turnover for Julius Randle. Tied his season high in assists. Something Jack talked about last night on the postcast. Minnesota had 35 assists on 49 made shots. Like, for comparison's sake, the Spurs had just 17 assists on 44 shots. So Minnesota's assist rate as a team, extremely high in this game. And Julius with a 12-1 assist to turnover. I know we've talked a lot, and a lot of it has been said, not necessarily on this show. A lot has been said about Anthony Edwards being the point guard. Like, local guys have talked about it. Like, Bill Simmons has talked about it in his podcast about how I don't love that Ant's a point guard. Julius Randle is the point forward for this team. They don't really use a point guard. A lot of their offense, especially early in the game, they're running through Julius Randle, and he was great in this game. 12 assists, 1 turnover. He also had 6 rebounds, like 22, 12, and 6. Very nice line for Julius with only the 1 turnover. He also had a steal in this game. He continues to be extremely, extremely good. And something else I mentioned last night on the postcast is Randle had a plus-minus of plus 30. And obvious caveats apply to individual player single game plus-minus in the box score. But a plus 30 in a game the Wolves won by 13. And, oh, by the way, nobody else on the team had a better plus-minus than, besides Randle, had a plus-minus above plus 14. Conley was plus 10 off the bench. DiVincenzo plus 13. Jaden was plus 14. Julius was a plus 30. Jaden on Saturday, I think, was a plus 24 and had a much better plus-minus than anybody else. So very strange the way that all shook out. But Julius was, obviously, he was on the floor with that small ball lineup in the first half of the fourth quarter and played the majority of the fourth quarter when the game was still in the balance, at least. And, it comes through on the stat sheet. Like, that's one of those where when it's that big of a difference, you got to pay attention to the plus-minus. Like, I'm not going to get in the weeds and be like, Ant was only a +1. Did he actually play that good? Like, that's not what that means. But when somebody's a plus 30 in 36 minutes, and somehow like Randle is a plus 30 in the same number of minutes that Ant was a +1, Randle was very, very good in this game. Very, very good. My third stud, it's either Naz or Dante. I guess I'd go with Naz Reid. Dante was very good. 18 points on 14 shots, 4 of 9 on threes. That was nice. 4 assists, no turnovers, which is nice. Really good. Like, the 4 assists for him is great. I thought Naz's performance, though, was super important based on all the stuff we already talked about related to the small ball lineups and Rudy not playing in the fourth quarter. They needed Naz to play well, and he did on the heels of a really strong performance against Boston. And, second night of a back-to-back, they needed Naz to perform extremely well. And I thought early in the game, as we talked about, he struggled on switches against Fox, which is obviously a huge ask. And I want to make sure I point that out. But 15 points on 6 of 11, 5 boards, 3 assists, 2 steals for Naz Reid in this game, just 2 turnovers, and was a +8 in 30 minutes. Played very, very well. Spaced the floor, was active on both ends, all the above. Very strong performance from Naz Reid, and they need this, especially when you're not getting any other bench production in terms of scoring. We've talked about this a lot. DiVincenzo in the starting lineup. Mike Conley's not scoring more than 1 or 2 threes a game is what you're going to get from him. Jalen Clark, you're not going to rely on to score. TJ Shannon isn't playing enough or shooting well enough to score. Well, he was good in this game, by the way. He got the line 6 times in 12 minutes and was obviously very good against Boston and OKC. But he only played 12 minutes, and this wasn't as much a TJ game. I don't know that you can rely on him to consistently score double figures off the bench. So it's got to be Naz. You don't have any other options. So to continue to see him you know, trend in the right direction in terms of his overall production. I think it was the OKC game he struggled in, but overall it's like 4 to the last 5, 5 to the last 6, 5 to the last 7, something like that, where he's played very well. Okay. Duds, I don't really have any duds. Like I said earlier, I don't actually think Rudy played poorly. I know he was a -8, but that was just kind of the game flow, and they played well when he was off the floor in the fourth. But at that point, like, there was no reason to put him back out. I don't know that I'd even necessarily give Rudy a dud. I don't really have a problem with how he played. He had 8 and 8 in 24 minutes. That was fine. 2 assists. No turnovers for Rudy. So I don't really have any duds in this game. I don't think there was any individual player that just didn't play well. Jalen Clark was good. 8 points in 11 minutes, knocked down both 3-point attempts, both free throw attempts he had, and had a steal. Like, that's a pretty solid Jalen Clark game, especially on the offensive end. So, no duds for me in this one. I thought everybody played well individually. The Wolves had 125 points on 56% shooting. They were 46% outside the arc. They only got to the line 13 times, but they made 77% of their free throws. All that stuff was good. They rebounded the basketball well in a game where there actually weren't that many rebounds because both teams scored a ton. So all that to say, solid overall all-around performance. No duds for me on the individual side of things. Coming up this week, the Timberwolves play the Pelicans twice, both games in New Orleans. So they'll get some great New Orleans cuisine sometime between Tuesday night and Thursday night. It's weird. It's not even a home and home. It's just 2 games in New Orleans. Then they come back home to play the Clippers on Saturday. So no game tonight. They play Tuesday, Thursday, and it's the standard every other schedule, but instead of the normal Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday this week for the Wolves. So 2 games at New Orleans. We'll preview that matchup tomorrow. Given that it'll be 2 games against the same opponent, that'll just be the only preview, obviously, this week. New Orleans is, of course, terrible. They're 3-18, which is always scary, even though this Wolves team this year has beaten bad teams. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what the Pelicans are up to here of late, how they've been losing, what to expect in the matchup. I will talk about also probably between tomorrow and Thursday shows, break down some of the lineup data. We'll talk about the zone that I mentioned earlier. We'll talk about some overall early season trends now that we are 20-ish games. Exactly 20 games through the season. So basically a quarter of the way. So we'll talk about some early season trends for Minnesota as we head toward the middle portion of the schedule. We'll do that on tomorrow's show. Kind of split it, I guess, between tomorrow and Thursday, since Thursday we won't have a preview because we're seeing the Pelicans for the second time in the week. So tomorrow and Thursday we'll do that. We'll obviously have post-game pods. And like I mentioned toward the top of the show today, I will very likely be the guest with Luke Idman on at least 1 or 2 of these games, the live postcast shows coming up here. So stay tuned for that. And I will mention it on the show when I'll be on there. But obviously, you always want to be listening and watching the live postcast when you're able to. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Our guy Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 fantasy basketball podcast out there, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, just like this show. The Locked On Network is also your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.